Speaker McCarthy and the Republican insurrectionists. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the conversation. I'm David Schuster. Well, it took 15 ballots, but Kevin McCarthy, by giving all kinds of concessions to the Freedom Caucus, which largely supported January 6th, Kevin McCarthy finally got the votes to become House Speaker. It's going to be an interesting time ahead, both for the House and for the country. And here to talk about it is Eric Ward. He's an executive vice president at Race Forward. He's a senior advisor for Western State Center. Eric is an expert on the relationship between authoritarian movements, hate violence, and preserving inclusive democracy. Eric, great to have you. First of all, what did you make of the 15 ballots that it took for McCarthy to win?
Yes, what we saw for the first time is the emergence of what Trumpism is going to look like in the post-Trump period. And so these ballots, the 16 ballots that were cast, served three purposes in this moment. The first, David, was to condition the American public to lead us to believe that there was some big distinction between these standout renegades in the Freedom Caucus and Kevin McCarthy. The truth is the distance between them and their ideology is non-existent. In each case, whether they were the renegades holding out or Kevin McCarthy, the goal is to undermine American democracy, to continue to weaken the gains of the civil rights movement by displacing democracy and inserting an authoritarian government that is not answerable or transparent. So the votes were really first about conditioning us to the new reality. The second was a jockeying of power. Of course, in the vacuum that has been created by the diminishment of Donald Trump, people are jockeying for position. This is why you saw several of the renegades fundraising between each vote, trying to build their power and speak to their base. The third thing we saw, though, is preparation for the dismantling of federal agencies and federal governments. And that's why once Kevin McCarthy secured the vote, the first things that he began to announce is the disruption of the ethics committees, an investigation on the Department of Justice. And we will continue to see these types of movements in the coming weeks and months.
And aside from the movements to dismantle a committee or to scale back the Department of Justice, are there specific policy priorities or legislative items on their agenda for the Freedom Caucus and the renegades?
Absolutely. When you look at the placement of some of the renegades and the subcommittees and the committees that they will be positioned on, when you look at some of the policy proposals, including, right, the dismantlement of the Internal Revenue Service, we should understand at the end of the day, this is about power, but this is also still about graft. This is a growing movement that understands that there is no one watching the shop in this moment, no one to prevent them from looting the pockets of the American public. And to do so, they need a weakened federal agency at the time where many of us are calling for stronger federal oversight against graft, against the degradation of the environment. What we will begin to see are policies that state that they are populist in their intent. But at the end of the day, they're weakening oversight over government agencies. And this will allow more corruption and more graft.
I agree with you on the corruption and graft, but in terms of actually being effective in weakening the federal government, does it seem like perhaps maybe that's more aspirational than anything because you still have the US Senate acting as something of a brake on whatever the House may come up with?
Absolutely. So we understand that on the march towards authoritarianism, the goal of the Republican Party was to seize both the House and the Senate, excuse me. Now, let's pause for a second. It's important to understand they do not have the majority support of the American public. Their support comes through gerrymandering and through the diminishment of the right to vote in this country. However, they have used that to gain illegitimate power, to claim that they speak on behalf of the American public. They were able to successfully gerrymander themselves into a House majority. They were prevented because of the American public of being able to do that at the Senate level. But the goal at the end of the day is it doesn't matter whether they are in control or not. It's about how much disruption they can create in the daily life of Americans and to send the message that government as a federal force is ineffective in responding to the plights and the needs of the American public.
The American public, of course, was horrified 2 years ago on January the 6th. Anything perhaps ironic or maybe even symbolic about the fact that there's Kevin McCarthy finally getting elected House Speaker on January 6th, and the first person he thanks is Donald Trump.
Is the first person he thanks. So 2 years ago, we watched the insurrection start outside of the Capitol. 2 years later, we are watching it begin inside the halls of the Capitol. And absolutely, the nod to Donald Trump is a nod to the founder of an ideology and a movement that sees itself in the position of being able to undermine American democracy. Maybe not through taking control of the House and the White House and the Senate, but creating enough disruption that it leads to the undermining of our ability to take care of day-to-day issues, such as the climate disaster that is happening in Northern California, whether we are talking about environmental pollution, the loss of jobs, the collapse of the Federal Air Administration and its ability to allow flights to take off this morning. These are tensions that will continue to grind away at the American public and its belief that we can rule ourselves as people. We don't need serfs. We don't need feudal lords. We don't need dictators. We just need the American public, and these renegades will seek to wear us down.
Any chance that this backfires? Maybe not in the short term and in the long term, because the Republicans have a very narrow majority in the House. They're going to have a hell of a time maintaining power, even with, regardless of what they do. And then when the American people look up and see, well, wait a second, now they're appeasing these insurrectionists, this Freedom Caucus. I wonder if that may only help Democrats the next time around in the 2024 elections.
Yes, we should understand that there are challenges within the ability of the Republican Party, particularly these renegades, to consolidate the party. The first is that there are Republicans who are beginning to push back at the takeover of their party. And we have to figure out a way of supporting them, even if we are not in agreement on the social and economic issues of the day. The second is to understand that we have to secure and fortify the Senate. Those of us listening today need to understand that the Republicans are poised in a better position to win control of the Senate during the next wave of elections than they were in this last electoral cycle. So we have a lot of work to do to make sure that voter turnout is happening, that voting rights are protected in this period. It is the Senate right now that is the buffer from preventing the Republican Party from establishing this authoritarian state that they are committed to doing at this point.
And as a political strategist, do you see a particular message perhaps resonating or being successful both for Senate races to come, but also in general for Democrats who are looking up and thinking, okay, how can we cauterize what the Republicans are doing by sending a message to the American people that is clear, that gets them to take action?
Absolutely. Look, the strategy is this. We have to make the case for a functioning, inclusive democracy that centers people, that is inclusive and transparent. Americans are tired of the status quo. We have watched this in wave after wave of elections. And so it is on the Democratic Party to move forward on providing relief to American families, ensuring that there is jobs and housing, and making the promise of equity real in American society. Look, at the end of the day, the control of the Senate will be made in very few senatorial districts in the United States. And we have to make sure that our family, that our neighbors are educated, prepared, and motivated to go to the polls for their own families and for American democracy. It means that we have to get to work now. We can't wait a year from now. We have to begin to mobilize in our communities to fight for those things where the right to live, love, worship, and work free from fear is upheld for American democracy.
A lot of elections in American democracy seem to be decided by independent and moderate voters. Will it resonate with them if in fact the Republican House is not able to govern. In other words, it seems like it was such a clown show, some Republicans said, just in terms of getting McCarthy elected speaker. The idea that they're going to be able to pass any legislation, fund the government, reach any sort of compromise with Democrats seems like a fantasy. So if they are dysfunctional in terms of running the government, does that move voters in the middle?
Look, the American voter is exhausted with the partisanship, with the conspiratorial theories. We have watched this election after election have the majority of Americans reject this authoritarian push by the Republican Party. Even members of the Republican Party oppose this authoritarian shift. Absolutely moderate Republicans, moderate voters will continue to show up on behalf of democracy. But we have to understand, sadly, gerrymandering in this country has ensured that the Republican Party can rule without the will of the majority. That's a broken democracy. And that doesn't get fixed unless Democrats decide to fix that process.
Should Democrats reach out and extend a hand to Speaker McCarthy, or should they hold back?
I think that we have to be wary, sadly, of reaching out to Congressman McCarthy, House Speaker McCarthy. Look, he has made it very clear that his goal was not to change course in terms of what the renegades wanted, in terms of issues and its impact on working families. At the end of the day, McCarthy simply wanted to be in charge. We should understand that. And we need to act accordingly. We can't give up democracy because we're afraid of authoritarians. We have to fight for democracy, and we have to find those Republicans who are willing to work alongside us. And we have to find the things that we have in common in this moment. It's time for a united front in support of democracy.
Eric Ward, Executive Vice President at Race Forward, also Senior Advisor of the Western State Center. Eric, thanks for coming on. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much.